Good evening. I'm so glad you could join me again. Tonight's message I've entitled Patterns of Perception. I believe there's a purpose and position for us all in the will of God. Purpose and position for us all in the will of God. The means and method of us getting there may look a little different. Do you know that God is sovereign? He knows us, our comings and our goings. He knows our abilities, our skills, our talents, our passions and pursuits. He knows about our environment, our upbringing, our family, our interactions, our social interactions, and how we are treated. God knows. He is sovereign. Someone once said, acceptance is the answer to all my problems today. When I am disturbed, it is because I find some person, place, thing, or situation, some fact of my life unacceptable to me. And I can find no serenity until I accept that person, place, thing, or situation as being exactly the way it is supposed to be at this moment. Nothing, absolutely nothing, happens in God's world by mistake. Unless I accept life completely on life's terms, I cannot be happy. I need to concentrate not so much on what needs to be changed in the world as on what needs to be changed in me and in my attitudes. This is such a beautiful statement of facts that I have found to be insightful and helpful to me. The opposite of acceptance is rejection or denial. First, you need to recognize that there is a problem. Do you have a problem that you are facing? What is it? Let's take a look at it. Let's take a real, honest, hard look at it. It might be even helpful to write it down. Pause the video. Go get a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen, and let's write it down. Let's write down what this problem that you are facing is. Let's write it down on a piece of paper. Let's not get carried away by a multitude of problems. Let's just take it one step at a time. What is your most pressing problem? What immediately jumps into your mind as being the number one issue? Why are you disturbed? What's troubling you? Again, you might find it helpful to write it down, so I hope that you have that piece of paper there in front of you and a pen or a pencil. And write it down. Write it on that piece of paper. Write it down and look. Take an honest look at the problem. What's disturbing you and causing you trouble. Maybe jot down just a few words to describe what it is. Is it a person? Is it a place? Is it a thing? A situation that you find unacceptable? You know, people can be a major disturbance in life. We can view people as unacceptable. I've found this to be true. I can recall being upset and frustrated until I was confronted by a wise individual who noticed that I was disturbed, that I was troubled, and he stopped me in my tracks and he asked, "What's wrong? Did someone not do what you wanted them to do?" For me, that was a revelatory statement. It was an inspirational and insightful question. That was it. That was it for me. That's why I was so disturbed. Someone wasn't doing what I wanted them to do. And I was the one who was personally suffering. I was the one who was troubled and disturbed by this person not doing what I wanted them to do. I was angry. I was carrying around this burden, this load. But with this individual's question to me, I began to see that my perception of the so-called problem was all wrong. I had been aggravated and agitated over something I really had no business concerning myself with. I had been concerned about how someone else did their job, how they didn't meet my expectations. I wasn't the boss. And here I was getting so disturbed by it. It wasn't my job to be the boss. And it was the boss who I was judging for poor performance according to my standards. And so when the question was asked of me, did someone not do what I wanted them to do? It was a resounding and tumultuous yes. I had this tendency to judge and place expectations on people. Expectations for them to act and do according to my own standards of perfection that even I couldn't live up to. Perhaps by looking at others, it helps distract us from taking a long, honest look at what I've discovered to be the true problem. A look at the self. I was so thankful for my friend's insightful question, and now I can first take a look at myself and see what is it about the problem that is disturbing me. We're continuing on in the book of Genesis chapter 37, and we read about Joseph and his brothers. And in Genesis 37, Joseph's brothers had a lot of disturbances going on within themselves. They thought their problem was on the outside, that their issue and their problem was Joseph. Joseph, the Bible tells us, was a young man of 17. We read that in Genesis 37, verse number 2. He was a young man of 17, and he was seen as special. 17 and special. The Bible tells us in Genesis 37, verse 3, that Israel, formerly known as Jacob, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because Joseph had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. You see, Joseph held a special place in the heart of Israel. The reason, the Bible tells us, is because he had been born to Israel in his old age. And because Israel carried Joseph in this special place in the heart, he gave him special treatment. Israel wanted Joseph to know how special he was to him. And so he did it with the displays of affection, a gift that may have brought him and his father closer together, but as it tells us in the next verse, drove he and his brothers further apart. Genesis 37, verse 4 says that when Joseph's brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. You see, the brothers recognized the special treatment of Israel towards Joseph. Where were their ornate robes? They too wanted special treatment. Just as the question was asked of me, we could ask it of the brothers. Did someone or somebody not do what you wanted them to do? If each of them were to get a piece of parchment out and write down the problem, next to it or underneath it, they could write, Father treats Joseph special, gives ornate robe. And how did this make them feel? They could write down, it makes us hate our brother to the point where we cannot speak a kind word to him. Essentially, the problem can be traced back to the insightful question about someone not doing what we want them to do. You see, Israel, their father, did not do what they wanted him to do. What they wanted is for him not to give special treatment, to not express his love as he saw fit, to not be in control of his love. That's essentially that essence at the core of what they wanted. In essence, they wanted to be in control of how their father expressed his love. And their hatred and their animosity would be focused on the recipient of that love. Their hatred and animosity would be focused on their brother Joseph. And their hatred would continue to grow. Joseph received special treatment. And Joseph also received special revelation. Joseph had two dreams. Dreams that were symbolic of rulership and reign. And it showed his brothers, his mother and his father, all bowing down to him. The brothers' hatred intensified towards Joseph. His brothers hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. It tells us in Genesis 37, verse 11, his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Later on, Joseph is instructed by his father one day to go to his brothers who are grazing their flock and bring a report back to him about how well they are doing. As Joseph finds out where they are and he makes his way towards them, they sneer with one another, saying, "Here comes that dreamer." And they plot to kill him. They plot to take Joseph's life. Again, if the brothers were to sit down and write down their problem, they could write next to the problem, Joseph has dreams of ruling. That was their problem. They had a problem with Joseph and his dreams about ruling. And how did this make them feel? Made them feel jealous. Why? Because in their minds, it might just come true. This was the reason for the plot to take his life. As they saw him approach, they said, "Here comes that dreamer," they said to one another. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of the cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then, get this, then we'll see what comes of his dreams." This is their idea. Kill the dreamer, destroy the dreams. But Reuben, one of the brothers, a voice of reason, sought to rescue his brother Joseph. He spoke up. He wasn't silent. He spoke up and said, "Let's not take his life." Reuben wanted to rescue his brother Joseph. He wanted to take Joseph back to their father Israel. When Joseph arrived, after he finally made it there to the camp, no longer at a distance, when he finally arrived, the first thing the brothers did was to go after problem number one. They wanted to take away Joseph's special treatment that was symbolized by his ornate robe. So that's the first thing they did. The brothers went after Joseph's special treatment, his love displayed from the Father. They stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing. They took him and threw him into the empty cistern. Then they agreed to sell him into slavery. They pulled him out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. The brothers then proceed to pretend that Joseph had been killed. They took the robe that they took from him and they dipped the robe into goat's blood. They dipped the robe, the sign of the Father's affection, into goat's blood. And they take it back to their father, leading him to believe that his son had been killed. And the father tells us there in chapter number 37, he goes into mourning, refusing to be comforted. And he says to them all, I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave. But little does the father know that the dreamer is still alive, and so is the dream. Often we can look at some of these stories, some of these things that happens in our life, and we can wonder about it. Why am I going through so much pain and hurt and tragedy and trouble? And you might notice as well as I have that on good days, if a problem erupts, if I'm in a good place, if I'm having a good day, I can handle that problem differently. But when it's a bad day, if I have something going on inside of me, that same problem, I can react in a totally different way, a more harmful and perhaps destructive way. And so what is it? It's not so much the problem, but it's how I perceive and react and respond to the problem. And so we really need to look deep down inside of ourselves and say, what is the true problem? What am I really wrestling with? Is it because someone doesn't act and do what I want them to do? Is it because they're not meeting my expectations? What is it about this disturbance that's within me? What is it about the situation that I find unacceptable? Really is, as I have seen it, a problem of perception. And we can get into these patterns of perception. If I continue looking at the problem the same way, if I keep on responding and reacting to the problem the same way, it doesn't change. But if I can change my perception of it, then it seems like the whole entire world changes. The way that I perceive the problem. And if I can learn to accept it. Doesn't mean I have to like it. If I can accept it, it seems like I can continue to move forward instead of being stuck. And I think that is helpful for us all to look at when we are going through some trouble or some problem, some disturbance. If we can sit down and look at it for what it is. And that's one of the questions that I found is helpful, especially when it comes to dealing with people and relationships. Did somebody not do something that I want them to do? Self really seems to be magnified in our problems. I, me. It's just like self is magnified, and that, to me, seems to be the problem in most instances, in most cases. Well, I hope that this has been helpful to you and has been a blessing to you. And I do hope that you have a good rest of your week. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, bye-bye.